Hi, I'm Jasma. Allow me to introduce this speedy, single-serving soba noodle soup recipe for if you only cook for yourself and have very little time to do it. On this installment of Recipes for One, where I share recipes for one person, we're going for speed, we're going for convenience. We're gonna make a noodle soup that is done in under 20 minutes that is very beginner-friendly. Here's a quick overview of the components and ingredients used for this meal. We have the soba, which is a buckwheat noodle, beef short plate slices, a poached egg, smooth tofu, bok choy, and some white button mushrooms. For the tools and equipment, you're going to need a knife and cutting board, 2 small pots, a small sieve, and a skimmer ladle or strainer. Let's begin by filling our first pot up halfway with water and get it onto the stove on high heat so that it can start coming to a boil and be ready to go by the time we're done prepping all of our other ingredients. And now to wash the fresh produce, I'm starting with the bok choy. Just cut off the end so we can easily break off the stalks and wash them individually under cold water. Then I'm also going to wash the button mushrooms, which are quite delicate, so be gentle with them so that they don't break apart. We also have the green onion and a piece of tofu. A quick tip for whenever you're working with a cutting board is to place a damp paper towel underneath so that it doesn't slide around. And now I'm just going to briefly chop up my green onions, which I'm using as a garnish for later on. Cut the tofu into chunks of your desired size. And if you have really large bok choy leaves, you can just cut them in half. This is also where you would process whatever meat you're using, but my beef short plate is already pre-sliced, which is quite convenient. It's also frozen, so you can always have it on hand and just take out small portions each time you want to cook with it. Moving on from the cutting board, I'm cracking a whole egg into a small sieve just to remove the loose bits of egg white. For the soup, I'm using chicken broth as my base. You can use any kind of broth, just make sure that it's unsalted so that you can have more control over the seasoning. And you can eyeball this, but I'm just going to measure out the amount I intend to use. Also prep the miso, which I'm using as the only seasoning for these noodles. It adds flavor and you also won't have to add any additional salt. Since miso is quite thick, I like to avoid having it clump up in the final soup by dissolving it first in some more chicken broth, and again you can just use water for this. And that concludes all of our prep. Now we can move over to the stove. That pot of water we had going should be boiling by now, and we're going to make our poached egg first. Turn off the heat and gently drop in the egg and cover for 4 minutes for a soft poached egg. And here you'll have some downtime to clean up and do some dishes. Once the egg is done, fish it out of the pot and skim off any of the extra loose egg whites or foam that is on the surface of the water, because we're going to reuse this pot of water to boil our noodles. Grab the second pot and we're going to simultaneously begin to prep the soup portion. So pour in the chicken broth or whatever soup base you're using. Cover and turn the heat to high so this can also come to a boil. Now if you only have one pot available, or if having to manage 2 pots at the same time on the stove intimidates you, just take it one at a time, do the noodles first, and then tackle the soup. It only takes about 5 or 6 minutes longer and it barely affects the workflow. In the first pot, we're going to cook the noodles. So once the water has come back to a boil, drop in your soba, give it a light stir, skim off any foam if needed, and this is going to boil for 6 to 7 minutes. Once the second pot with the chicken broth is boiling, add the button mushrooms and miso mixture and wait for this to come back to a boil. Then add the beef short plate slices and tofu. When the meat is mostly done cooking, we're going to add a tiny splash of sesame oil along with the bok choy into the pot. Give it a stir and the bok choy cooks pretty quickly, so as soon as it turns a bright green, you can turn off the heat. By now, the soba noodles should be done, so you can either do what I'm doing here to transfer the noodles into the bowl or strain away the water over the sink. Carefully pour the soup over all of the noodles and top it off with the poached egg and chopped green onions. Now, a single serving by the standards of an 18-year-old teenage female who isn't the most athletic probably isn't going to be the same portion size for you. And like all of my other recipes in this series, this is flexible and very much welcomes you to adjust the quantities and ingredients to create a more suitable single serving meal for you. Thanks for watching!